We've got James Rebanks, who is a farmer based in the Lake District in the UK, where his family have lived and worked for over 600 years. He's a best-selling author. He's a best-selling author whose books include English Pastoral and his autobiography, A Shepherd's Life. And Melvyn Bragg said English Pastoral deserves to be called a masterpiece. And for those of you who don't know Melvyn Bragg, he's an English baron. So he knows. So please welcome James Rebanks. Oh, and I should say, we will have time for questions. Hold your questions.
That's it. Can you hear me? Yeah. I'll probably make a mess of this, but first things first. Thank you very much to Matthew and everybody else who's organised this thing, putting all the work in. What an amazing event! And me and my wife Helen and kids are. I was going to say absolutely stoked. We never say absolutely stoked at home, but I'm already picking up the lingo. We're absolutely stoked to be here, Ripper. My son said, "Don't do that. It's basically racism, Dad. Don't do that." Okay, so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about our farming journey. Hopefully it's useful to you. I was already talking to a young man at the back, young farmer, and he was saying that he and his family are on a sort of journey. And I kind of like this event because it's not being too judgy. It's not for like the sort of purists who are doing everything perfect. It's just for anybody who wants to go into this broad church, wants to learn some new stuff, try and apply it to their farms, try and make it work. Don't get too preachy, don't get too perfect about the regen thing. Just keep it a big, broad church. Is that dropping? Go on, I think I can make that work. And I'll hold it if I can't. There, go on, I've got it. It's good. Yeah. If you want something to do and ask the English, it's good. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about our journey. So first things first. Our farm is not some vast operation. I've only been in Tasmania for the last 2 days. Never been here before. Don't really know very much about it. I thought, I wonder if it's sort of huge, big farms. They might think our little farm's irrelevant. But actually, you go around these river valleys here, and it's all little farms, right? It's very, very familiar. It's very green. It's small fields. It's little farmsteads. I suspect you're very similar people to what we are where we live. When I get up in the morning, the first thing I think about is how do I keep this thing going for my family. I'm not some sort of big corporation. We're all involved in it. So's my mum. So was my dad. The 600 year thing is a complete pain in the ass because everybody's involved and we're all related to everybody. And it's a landscape where it's super crowded, so I can't really expand, a little bit like these valleys here. We're all butting up against each other. We can't be perfectly scalable agri-businesses and all that. You just have the bit you have and you do the best you can. And it's the middle of winter at home, heading into the shortest day for us. That's our farm. I live in that old stone barn thing. We only have sort of one building on the farm that's up the top of the hill. And it's a very, very old-fashioned hill farm. It's all on 45-degree slope. I think we have one flat field on the farm. It's at 1,200 feet above sea level in the north of England, just below Scotland. So from the hill behind my house, you can see Scotland in the distance. And amongst many other things we do, we have sheep that go onto a common grazing system on the mountains where we have to work with other people to gather them out. I don't know if you have anything like that in Australia or Tasmania, but we basically have these sort of really ancient farming systems. So it takes 10 people and about 25 sheepdogs 2 full days to 6 times a year to bring the sheep in off the mountains, and we have to work together. And that land belongs to feudal aristocrats. Basically, the descendants of them still own most of England. And the deal was we became legally established squatters, commoners on their land, in return for fighting the Scots. Right? And anybody who's ever read anything about the English and the Scots fighting battles, the battles are hilarious. They basically consist of loads of farmer peasants facing off against each other, and then somebody shouts, "Panic!" And then everyone goes, "I'm not dying for these posh people, like it." And so whether they like tossed a coin about whose turn it was to give up on that particular day and not die for posh people, I don't know. But there was no goddamn way we were going to die for those people. Okay. So we end up in this place. We've got about 200 acres that we own. that's enclosed that's our own, and that sort of falls to me and our family to try and work out what to do with that. And then we have another 300 acres of other people's, and then the mountain grazing beyond. If you're wondering where it's at, right in the north bit of England. Yeah, so that's basically where we are. And my dad was very northern, very sort of, I think Richard Flanagan said last night, and he's right, sort of rural working class. My dad, when he wasn't working on the farm, worked in a quarry, got paid really badly, worked on shearing trailers, clipping sheep, working the local auction or sale yard. Never really had any money in his whole life, but was one of the hardest working men you'd ever meet. The kind of man or woman that you'd meet in a lot of rural areas, just very humble, liked by everybody, worked really hard. That's me at the back giving him a cuddle. This is the only known photograph of anyone giving my dad a cuddle. He was a fairly tough old dad, northern style dad. And I didn't realise such things as cuddles existed until I saw this photograph of my youth. So there clearly were some cuddles. And anyone that's read my books will know that my family, like lots of yours, through the course of the 20th century, began to be squeezed, began to find it more and more difficult. Those small family farms were sort of, maybe it's a little bit mythical, but feels like they were sort of flying between about 1950 and 1970. So my granddad in the old photographs looks quite well established. He's got quite a good belly on him. I've got a little one, but he had quite a good one. And he had the sort of three-piece tweed suits. We know he had a couple of racehorses that they raced at local tracks, and quite a nice car. And there's a few people got to working on the farm. They were doing all right around about 1960. Around about 1990, not so much. When it gets to my dad's turn, there's a really big overdraft, and the farm workers have vanished. And my dad's working about twice as many hours as I think my granddad did a generation before. And my dear old dad takes this very personally. Because you do take it very personally when you're on a farm, right? It's all your faults. It's not global economics. It's not capitalism, whatever. It's you. Why is it not working anymore? Why are we having to work so hard? And guess what? I turn up straight out the oven, age 15 or 16. I leave school to work on the farm because I kind of bummed out of school because that's what you do in my family to get back to the farm. And guess who I blamed for our farm not being very successful? Yeah, my dad. How crap is that? Yeah. And I know that's a completely stupid way to look at it, but when I was 15, it's like, Dad, why don't you have a nice car like Grandad does in the old photographs? Where's the racehorses gone? Why aren't we doing this? Why aren't we doing that? Horrible. Horrible. So don't pick on dads if it's failing. It's probably structural. Anyway, so we're part of this whole system. I think that graphic sums up loads of things about modern farming. What did we do in the 20th century? We got awesome at producing simple food crops. Yeah, we scaled up, we got amazing machinery, we worked out how to grow the same damn thing in the same field over and over again, we worked out how to kill the pests that would come along with pesticides and herbicides and diseases, and we massively simplified and specialised and headed in that direction to the bottom, and we were spectacularly good at that. Let's give ourselves a half-hearted pat on the back before we go into the bad things. We were spectacularly good at that. And we now, you just have to go around a modern supermarket to realise how good we were at that. We literally have at our fingertips cheap, abundant, sort of wonderful food sources that any medieval king would be absolutely baffled by if you took around a modern supermarket. Why am I praising supermarkets at an event where everybody hates them? Well, I'm kind of not, but I'm just nodding to the fact that there's a reason why we did all that stuff. It did shape the modern world. The fact that many of us would get a holiday or 2 holidays a year now, the fact that we're walking around with $1,000 phones in our pockets, the fact that we've got this sort of beautiful stuff in our houses that people didn't have 2 generations ago. Where did that come from? One of the places is by cheapening food. And we were all complicit in it, not just the farmers, everybody that shops, everybody that benefited from it, all complicit in it. But by the time you get to me being like 25 years old and getting serious about farming for the first time, started listening to environmentalists, and they were becoming a real pain in the ass, weren't they? They were popping up and telling us that there's way less birds than there used to be, there's way less insects than there used to be, there's something wrong with soil. Now, my granddad's response to this, I can remember it very clearly. We had a program called Country File in the UK, and a presenter called John Craven, and he was the first person to come into our house through the television screen and tell us that farmers had messed things up. My grandfather thought he was worse than Pol Pot, worse than Hitler. He'd literally turn the telly on and hate this guy every damn Sunday. Bless him. I think he was doing his best to tell us important things. But anyway, we did not want to hear that. Who the hell wanted to hear that through the 80s, 90s, and 2000s? Really difficult stuff. Turns out it's all true. Ugh. So our farming journey has our losing money and our failure economically coincided with that disappearing of biodiversity and those problems. So whatever's doing for that stuff is not working for us and little farms in our landscape. So we got really, really serious about 15, 20 years ago about trying to get out of a system that wasn't working for us. And we initially did it very incompetently. We did things like, when Helen and I took over the farm, we stopped putting synthetic fertilizer on our hay pastures. Our compacted soil, 50 years wrecked hay pastures, and guess what we did? We had a 30, 40, 50% collapse in hay yields. That didn't feel cool, I can tell you. And everybody driving past went, I told you, you don't put that stuff on, you grow less crop. What the hell are you talking, like, what are these weird hippie things that you're now doing? And I'm thinking, it's because I'm broke. Shut up, it's because I'm broke. Anyway, what that led to, there's that sort of clumsy, ineffective way of stepping out of the status quo and the conventional systems did make us start to learn really quickly. It's embarrassing having a hayfield with hardly any bales on. That's not a cool look. So suddenly I started going on YouTube, I started finding friends that knew about soil, and the question was, what is wrong with my field that it can't grow more than that when I'm not giving it synthetic fertilizer? How does soil work? Like, tell me this stuff. And that was about 15 years ago. Over the last 15 years, managed to bring together a sort of brilliant brains trust of friends who've been able to make thick old me that left school at 15 understand all of this stuff, right? And I now know we didn't have to collapse hay yields by coming out of that. There's steps to go through to grow your soil health, to do this in a way that doesn't result in sort of collapse of the system. And what do we keep on the farm? We keep belted Galloway cattle. And why do we keep belted Galloway cattle? Because they're just hobby cows with stripes, right? That's what I thought for most of my life. We used to breed Chevrolets and limousines and very modern commercial cattle. We got belted Galloways because Helen thought they were cute. And this is not a very manly talk right now, is it? Do you know what? Turned out to be absolutely inspired. So there's a number of hacks in this talk for anybody thinking about changing your farming system. What kind of livestock do you need on your farm? You need the ones that are best historically adapted to the place that you live in, that can do it without props. Turns out belted Galloways are the nearest thing to a native cow breed within 50 or 100 miles of where I live. Also, genius, they became a small holding hobby cow that didn't improve as fast as other cows in the 20th century. Improving was making them grow quicker to 400 days, putting longer legs on them, having a bigger carcass. Turns out that's pretty disastrous for having a hardy outwintering cow where I live. So they're a genetic cul-de-sac, and when I go looking... when we already have a couple of belted Galloways and I start wondering, what does the perfect cow look like with no inputs? These bloody things that I thought were a hobby cow turn out to be it. They are awesome where we live at 1,200 feet above sea level with over a meter's worth of rain, with a month's worth of snow on the ground. And we now farm them without any inputs whatsoever. No bought feed, no silage, no hay. We do 365-day a year outside grazing on a sort of Greg Judy type system. Anyone that's following that from Missouri? In fact, I copied Greg Judy word for word over about a 3-year period, having no idea whether his dates and his times and his recovery periods would work in the north of England. Turns out his numbers work perfectly where I'm at, which is just a complete fluke, but doesn't matter. The other part of our farm, that's our sheep flock. Where in the breeds that we keep, we try to have the best possible genetics in those breeds. And we're lucky we have one of the top flocks of Herdwick sheep. They are absolutely the native heritage breed for where we live. They're basically Viking sheep that live out on those wet, cold mountains year-round. Their specialised thing is not dying of pneumonia when it rains for 6 months, right? When it rains cold, sideways, 6 months, high up on the top of a mountain. Guess what I need? If I'm don't have a barn, don't buy feed, I need a sheep that can survive 6 months of that weather with flesh on its back and do the basics itself. Bloody genius sheep. By the way, you do your version of this. I don't exactly know what the Tasmanian version of this is for a cow or a sheep. Don't just copy me. Find the thing that's been tested locally. So on this journey, and some of you will be in the same place as me 10, 15 years ago, find your people that are worth listening to. Mine was Greg Judy, the American grazier on YouTube. It was Dr. Alan Williams, who's a sort of hybrid of genius grazer and soil scientist. It was a lady called Caroline Grindrod that came to my farm, who's a sort of holistic management, Alan Savory trained type person. She was absolutely brilliant. And then I've got a heap of ecologists. And guess what you should do with ecologists? You should let them come to your farm. You think they're going to come and pick fault with you, so did I. You get them to your farm, you make friends with them, and you say, okay, tell me kindly what's fucked up. Excuse me. Well, and they will. They'll walk around and they'll go, you don't know about soil, right? You don't know about rivers, right? Where's the ponds? But you need to know, because you can start to do something about it then. So find people that know a heap of stuff that you don't know. The first thing we did on the farm, so I got the first big idea on my farm is, we know what we're doing in the fields. That was wrong, but bear with me. We thought we knew what we were doing in the fields, but round the edges, every hedge, every boundary, every riparian strip, every bit of terrible land, I'll fence that off and I'll turn it into a high-value habitat. And then hopefully, this is round about when my first book came out in 2015, hopefully the journalists and environmentalists won't pick on me too much, because I'll have all these wonderful edge habitats and I can carry on farming like my dad. That was the original strategy. And that's kind of cool. It led to a farm where, and I'll show you another picture later, it led to a farm where we did have amazing habitat, like young woodlands, wetlands, riparian strips, hedgerows, tree planting strips. That was great. And then one of my ecologist friends one day said, why are you always talking about the edges? And I said, like, yeah, because I'm doing that so that you like me. I mean, I don't get killed in the media, right? Like, he said, yeah, but 90% of your farm's not the edges, it's the fields. Like, wakey, it's what you do in the fields is far and away the most powerful thing. And that's when we transitioned to the really much more ambitious grazing with longer recovery periods. And I've just come from that tent next door. And is anybody else in there with Felice? Oh, mind blown. Not because it's new to me, but just it was articulated so simply. My God. Like, I came out of that tent, I'm like, I know what my job is. My job is to pack my farm, pack my soil, pack my sward with biodiversity, because that comes right through the food chain to you or anybody else that eats my stuff. Or more importantly, to my family and my kids. Like, let's pack it with biodiversity. And I think what I really loved about what she said was, we think biodiversity is like elephants or some exotic wild thing. A lot of biodiversity, maybe most biodiversity, is beneath the surface, right? And what 100 years of modern agriculture done on our farm is leave our farm with way too little organic matter, way too compacted soils that were like concrete, fields that we constantly took the organic matter away from and didn't replace because we were making hay on them. Really, really dumb stuff. And what we've managed to do with much more ambitious regenerative grazing is we're basically building up the mobs of cattle and sheep, often together. We're doing these really, I'll show you better pictures in a minute, but longer recovery grazing periods. And what the grazing people were teaching me is the absolute miracle of a green plant, right? So if you're wondering how to mend your soil, mend your farms, the answer is right in front of you and has been your whole life, just nobody explained it properly. It's that green plants mend soil. They mend soil. Why? I think we're going to do a farm walk tomorrow, but I'm looking at all this beautiful long grass out here. When green plants get beyond the sort of first couple of leaves to longer leaves, they become very, very good at turning sunlight into root exudates. They're pumping sunlight into the ground as carbon and sugars. The longer we let those green plants get, the greater, the faster that flow becomes, and we're using green plants to mend soil. And you might think, why is the green plant giving away stuff to the soil? That'll come out in loads of more technical talks than this, but basically the magic is plants learned to give away vast amounts of good stuff from the sun through their green leaves to the ground to attract other things to them, microbiological things that fetch things to the root base. So when you pull sort of spade full of healthy soil out, and it's got the roots all hanging with sort of globules of soil. Why are they hanging to it? Because that biology has all come to the soil because it's giving away vast amounts of its root exudates. So the answer is staggeringly simple and was in front of us all our lives, and in front of our parents all their lives, if you farmed, and your grandparents since the beginning of time. It is literally to use green plants to mend our land. And the more diverse green plants you have, the better. So one of the great things about working with ecologists is they said, your dad and granddad must have been pretty crap farmers because there's still loads of biodiversity left in the pastures. I was like, was that a compliment? Because by that stage I was 30-something years old. I'm like, so I was a crap farmer too. So we still had a lot of biodiversity there ready to come back. It probably means that we're setting off in a really good place as well, because if you have a cropping farm that's been a cropping farm for 100 years or so, that's massively depleted soil compared to mine. So we were grazing on sort of short rotations, quite short stuff, like a lot of modern farmers still do. That isn't the worst. That's halfway to good. Right, that just needs tweaking with allowing more biodiversity to happen, much more biomass to happen. That's my full workforce. Actually, not half my full workforce, I should say, or quarter, something like that. So it's Helen and I. Isaac, who's at the back, put your hand up, Isaac. #1 electric fence shifter. In about 5-10 years, he's going to be looking for a placement in Tasmania, I can tell you now. So get his business card. He'll come over here and move fences for you and mend your land. Done the bit for Isaac. And the really, really big thing, you hear people in sort of regen world saying that, soil looks like chocolate cake. I don't buy that metaphor at all. Do you think it looks like chocolate cake? I wouldn't eat that chocolate cake, but it certainly looks good. And what we found by doing loads of science on the farm was my dad and granddad had grazed our farm from about 21% soil organic matter. So we have these upland acidic peaty soils with very high levels of organic matter. We'd grazed it from like 21% down to 12 or 13. And what we found is with the most radical long rests and trampling, which I'll come to in a moment, we can put 3 or 4% soil organic matter back in the ground within 5 years, right? And the difference, but if you're sitting here and you're skeptical and you're still using synthetic fertilizer, let me tell you, the difference between a field at 11% and 15% soil organic matter is unreal. You leave one and it's sulking as it comes out of the ground. The other, with 4 or 5% more organic matter, is bounding out of the ground. Like the biomass difference is unreal. And my friend Caroline Grindrod, who now is the sort of guru of our place, when she first told me about how to do the great grazing, I did what all very brave men do, is I picked a field that no one could see from the road, right? And I decided to do a very radical version of regen grazing one summer on the one field on my farm that no one would laugh at me about when they drove past. And I'll tell you what we did with it in a couple of slides. But the results were so staggering and so obvious to the naked eye after 6 months of doing it on that field. I went into the house and I said to my wife, Helen, who's grinning at me from over there, probably grinning because she thinks I'm an idiot, but I went back into the house and I said, everything I think I know about farming is probably wrong. Everything this woman has told me, Caroline, is right. I can tell you right now, it's right. Oh boy, have we got some learning to do. And oh boy, have we got some changes to do. And oh, damn it, I'm going to have to do this on the farm that everyone can see from the road as well. Right? So I think there's a talk later in some of these sessions called the hardest paddocks between your ears. Definitely is at my house. That's the bit, getting your head out of it. Just going, hang on, stop fighting. Just stop fighting, Jim. You don't have to do what you always thought you had to do. Just like open the thing up, make it a blank page and start putting the good stuff down. Start going with the good stuff. That's Rob Dixon. That's my brilliant ecologist friend. He now comes and walks around the farm about twice a year, and he'll just, super practical, right? I'm going to tell you a secret. Some environmentalists are arseholes, but some of them are awesome. Some of them just really care, and they're not expecting unrealistic stuff from you. They're going to help you in a sensible way. He's awesome. He comes to my house and he'll say, could we and it's not all making things less productive. So one of the things he came to the farm recently and said was, I know you love your long grazing and it's doing amazing things for soil, but we might need in some places to do a shorter rotation for some of the more rare plants. So he did a plant survey on the farm, found over 200 species of plants, grasses and herbs. Like, I'm blown away. Find out the good stuff about your farm. There's probably loads of good news as well as bad news by working with them. We're obsessed with muck. That's my other helper, Tom. Obsessed with dung beetles and all the sort of biology of muck. That's another one of my friends, Kane. He's an expert on insects. I wouldn't want to sit next to him at a dinner party for too long, but he knows a lot, and he tells me what the insects want. And again, he's cool. He doesn't want the whole farm. He's just like, can I have the riverside strips? Could we do something in terms of timing of grazing? Could we do what the flowers need there? I'm like, yeah, why not? It's not a big problem. That's what some of our native pastures look like. They're absolutely packed with wildflowers. The one that I really love is red clover. So one of the basically, as you change your grazing and you extend out your recovery periods, really, really simple thing that happens is there are certain plants like red clover that need maybe 20 days more to grow seed and flower than white clover. So you get this transition, particularly if you have like in your seed bank hidden beneath your feet. If you have all these ancient sort of seeds that belong in your native grassland, they start popping up when you let them, right? It's staggering. You don't even have to plant this stuff, it just turns up. An amazing feed as well. So that's the sort of edgelands that I was creating before we got serious about the grass. What we found when we did the edges is that, let me take a step back. So the botanist, after 5 years of fencing off my riparian strips, no grazing, no management, just fence them off, I got him to do a second survey. And I did it in reverse order. He said, where do you want me to go last? I said, go to the bits I fenced off, because they're the wild bits and I'm going to score big there. And he came back at the end of the day. The traditional hay meadows had over 100 species. The cattle regen pastures had over 100 species. The sheep pastures had 50 to 70 species, less but still good. And the wild strips, I was like, go on, hit me, how good? He said, less than 30. I said, what the hell? Like, that's the wild bit. And a mark of how cool it is, he said, no, you just got this wrong, James. You got this wrong. Wild is not abandoned and is not fenced off abandoned. Wild always included herbivores. Wild includes disturbance in grazing. You just over-egged it. He said there's some really good stuff happening in there. It's not necessarily wrong to have an area where we let some succession happen and thorns grow and things happen. That's good. That's a good addition. But don't think that fencing something off without all of the natural processes is inherently good. So now I put the cattle back in through those areas, like even this woodland here. I think last time I was in Australia, they were talking about saltbush, like paddocks for drought. I actually love that idea. I went, okay, I know how to do this in England. I'll have my riparian strips will be my snowy day outdoor barn. So rather than getting like $100 bale and tractor out on a snowy day, I let them into those areas and electric fence them through them once or twice a year. Turns out my botanist loves it, and every day I do that, I save like $100 on hay, and I don't have to start a tractor up. By the way, Greg Judy calls it heavy metal disease. He says if he goes to a farm and you see brand new tractor there and you see a new combine there and you see other things there, he said they're almost certainly not making money. He said, trust me, right? He calls it heavy metal disease, and one of the things that we've taken from him is the less we spend on metal, the better, right? The more we spend on cows, the more we spend on land, the more we spend on family or whatever else, good. The less we spend on metal and tractors, the better. So this is a transition away from that heavy sort of leverage system. I don't know if I can make that work.
You should be able to if you just scroll over the image and a thing should pop up. Yeah, there you go.
Okay. Never mind. Doesn't matter. Sheep are more difficult than cows for regen, right? Sheep are tricky. They're like, particularly mountain sheep like mine, don't really like 3 strands of electric wire, bit of a hassle. So what we've done is we've re-engineered the farm from being 12 paddocks to 60 paddocks. We're trying to get every paddock to be like a 3 or 4 acre paddock. Why? Because regen grazing really requires you to have lots of cells like on a checkerboard. The minimum number of flocks and herds, so simplifying our flock and herd structure was a massive step forward. You can't do it if there's a batch of young stock over there and a batch of bulls over there and a this and a that and the other. That means you've got too much stuff in too many places. So we got it down to 1 mob of sheep for most of the year and 1 mob of cattle. And we've got these 60 cells. They're 3 to 4 acres big. Why? Because I can stick every sheep on the farm and every cow on the farm in them, and it's a sub 3 day grazing event. And then I want enough cells that I'm moving around them slowly And it's in some cases sometimes it's 40 days till I get back. Sometimes it's 120 days till I get back. So that's how densely mobbed they are when they're going into one of those 3 or 4 acre paddocks, right? And the good thing about sheep, once you get over the fact that they're a pain in the ass, is, and I love them, I'm just a little cynical about them at this age. The great thing is they're the best tramplers of organic matter, okay? They are awesome. This tent was waist high with grass, and then we put 100 sheep in it, and we locked them in, and went and had a few beers. If we came back at night, they'd trample it better than cattle. They'd absolutely, like, they'd have it down on the floor like a machine, and that's an awesome tool for, like, putting carbon on the ground. So that's the mob with, like, using lambs in it. Hopefully those of you that are stock farmers will just see how healthy those sheep are. Why they're going so quick? Because that's midsummer, and I'm making them graze quite long, lignified, woody grass that they don't really want to be in the last field any longer for. Don't care, in a way. I'm making them do quite tough things. Greg Judy talks about landscape repair mode and livestock performance mode. Be aware that they might not be quite the same thing. Livestock performance mode. I'd love to show you the next slide if that were possible. I think that's going to come in a moment. So we got this thing in my mind. Okay, so really, really simple. James' science is, that's going to come in a moment. So I've got to let as much of my farm in the growing season. So we grow from the 5th of May to the 5th of October, and we have a very long winter where nothing grows. In that growing season, how do I get so the maths are, and the bit of planning, the planned grazing, how do I get the maximum amount of the farm to have the longest possible biomass on it as possible, turning it into the most efficient photosynthesis machine possible to put the most good stuff in the ground? And then when I've grown all this biomass, which might be suboptimal in terms of diet, what is the process whereby I get that laid down and regrow in time for winter for deferred grazing? Sorry if this is getting a bit technical. That's how crazy it looks around the 25th, 27th of July when we put sheep into paddocks. Ever seen sheep in such crazy long paddocks? No, there's a reason for that. There's a really good reason, which is that's not the best performance grazing for sheep. They would like it the shorter, sugary stuff with more protein. But I'm in livestock performance mode at that stage of the year. And this is, bear with me. So after 1 day, that field looks like this. After 2 days, it looks like this. After 3 days, it looks like the bottom corner, and it's like you've gone with a mechanical crimper. So it's by using that mob of sheep, it's like I've gone around with a mechanical crimper on a cropping farm, and I've laid down like 3 inches of really solid biomass on the surface. Now, I'm told if you try that on degraded cropping soils, you might not have the soil biology to digest it. But we do, after several years of doing that. And the obsession I got in my head was, how long could the recovery periods be to get how mad could it get? And how much could I put down? And how much can my soil take up? And so I got a bit obsessed by this. I'm a little bit OCD. Spent the last 5 years on some of the fields that we started on, pushing this to the absolute limit and getting to the point where I thought, is anybody else seriously, is anyone else in the world doing this slightly crazy thing? Turns out not really on a sheep farm in the hills like we are anyway, let's put it that way. And I thought I might be overdoing it. I thought, sometimes you get obsessive about a thing. So some of my mates were saying, I don't think you need to grow quite that much or put quite that much down. And I just kept going to the house to Helen saying, we need to know. We need to know, what's the top of the envelope? How good could it be? And then one of my heroes that I mentioned earlier is Dr. Alan Williams. He came from America to visit the farm. Actually, Greg Judy's also been as well. Both my heroes have been to the farm. Dr. Alan Williams came last June. And I said, Alan, I need to know, am I pushing this too far and doing something silly, or is it still working? Are you pleased with it? He got a spade out, dug a proper spade full of soil up, held it up. It was actually on the Carbon Cowboys Instagram account, any of you that watched that. And just like this massive grin came on his face, and he said, whatever the hell you're doing on this field, keep doing more of it. And I was like, really? I'm not doing a stupid thing? And he's like, no, this is awesome. And he said it was the best. Sorry, I'm bragging. He said, and it's the first time in my life I thought, oh shit, I might actually be a decent farmer. He said it was the best soil he'd seen in Europe on multiple trips he'd been around Europe. And also he was telling me there's some, I don't know the technical name for it, there's some test, and this is why I was so excited by the last talk by Felice next door. There is some test of the amount of living stuff in a unit of soil. I forget the technical name for it. That's the one. And I said to him, okay, what's a regular score? He said, well, loads of the farmland we go on has 2,000 to 3,000 micro whatevers of this. I'm very technical, you can tell. I'm a scientist, basically. And I said, okay, what do you think that has? And he said, well, without measuring it, definitely 14,000, 15,000. And I said, okay, you can tell I'm a little competitive. I said, what's the best score you've ever seen? Like, you're going to win, right? It's a male. And he said they'd seen a field somewhere with 19,000 of this. But he was like, no, you're in like the top of like 1% for soil health now. And I bloody love that. And that the other bit, if you're in the audience and you're thinking, this sounds like weird shit to me, focus on the bottom slide. So the bit that blew me away about this thing is, right, and what I'm going to urge you to do, if you're a farmer, literally pick the paddock that no one will see next summer in the grazing season. Just do this, right? Give it the longest period that you possibly can, then either mechanically or with livestock, put it down as flat as you can, with enough time for it to regrow back for the growing season. So the Greg Judy bit of magic is, if I get off my fields round about middle of April, I let it grow until the end of July. That grows me the maximum amount of biomass I can in that early part of the growing season. I then basically mob it and lie it down. And that, if I do that around the 27th of July, on as many fields as I can, my regrowth has 75 days to grow before the first frost. Now, how does that apply to Tasmania or Australia? I haven't got a bloody clue. You'll have to work it out yourselves. But in our system, it works like a dream. Absolute dream. Your winter stockpile for the following winter has 75 days to grow before the following first frost. And guess what else is magic? So in the valley where I live, even now, my next door neighbour says it's impossible to outwinter cattle. This is even after I've done it over the fence from him for 5 years. He's still telling me it's impossible to do what I do. The conventional wisdom where we live is that you house cattle for 7 months of the year, bedding them, silaging them. Nobody is making any money doing that, and nobody will change because like stuck in the mud. So, and that's because it's big Limousin and Charolais cattle, and everyone's experience of outwintering is you put them in a bare paddock in October, they're in calf for the following spring. So what happens over the following week? They begin to tear up the pasture. It has no root depth or cover. So they're going straight in with those big old hoos, those big cattle, and they turn it to mud, and they lose all the flesh off the backs because there's no good nutrition out there. And then they look me in the eye and they say, you can't outwinter cattle. And I'm going, hang on a minute, that is not what we're talking about at all. Get the right cattle that carry flesh into winter. Prepare your pastures through that process, through the preceding months. Have the cover. Vitally, cattle that aren't too big. The glory about those little cattle with the stripe on that I thought were a joke is that they're a perfect size. They don't punch holes in the ground in winter. And you know all that biomass that at the end of July I lay down? That's been grown back through with the lush green stuff. Right, so not only is the feed quality awesome coming out of healthy soil for winter, but in the bottom of it, there's still a thatch with those cows are standing on, right? So this is not somehow escaping the farming truths of your whole life. This is about learning a new bunch of tricks, really specific tricks to make the impossible actually possible, right? And in terms of economics of this, so I've got this model in my head, which is including time, including fencing materials and other things. I need a cow to live for me for £200 a year. In England, with the housing model, it's running between £800 and £1,000 per cow per year. And then they're selling like a £1,050 bullock or store cattle. There's no freaking money in it. If you're lucky, sometimes they're spending more on the cost than they are on what they're selling. And I need to be selling an £800 calf right? So what happens when we go to the sale yard is I turn up and sell an £800 calf, and my neighbour says, "Oh, your calves are crap compared to mine." Why did I do that in an Australian accent? No idea. Ripper. God, thank you. This is shameful. As my son said, "Dad, don't do it. Don't do it." So you need to grow a thick skin if you're going to do things different from everybody around you. And you know what? Grow a thick skin, because they ain't going to be around. And what I realized a few years ago is the boys down the pub will cheer you right until the day you go bankrupt. You're one of the boys. You're just like me. We all fit in. We're all mates. And when you go bankrupt, they'll do absolutely nothing. And you'll have to go and get a job and to look after your family doing something else, and you'll be gone. So what's that worth? Not frigging much, is it? Might be quite good fun having a beer on a Friday night. But what you really need is friends that will respect and admire you when you step out and do something different that actually changes the game so that you can survive. And we've got both kinds of friends. I've got friends that give me hell about all of this. Still my friends, to be fair. And I've got other friends that are really into it and are pushing it or doing different things to me, and we're swapping notes. But you're going to get people tell you that you're a fool if you start doing things differently. So my neighbour who doesn't like this stuff, selling the £1,100 bullock, thinks my bullocks at £800 are junk compared to his, but will tell me the month after that he lost his first 4 calves because they got a new limousine bull and they were too big and they couldn't get them out with a ratchet. And I know from his daughter that they're making no money and they're worried about how they're going to even exist in a few years' time. I'm like, you can laugh at my bullocks all you like. I'm making £600 a cow profit and you're losing money per cow. So, like, you can have the laugh. I'll just walk away from it, which I don't like doing, actually. But hey-ho. This is what some of our 120-day rested pastures look like. You'll see how long and dead and crazy it looks. Some of the stuff we're doing is really quite out there. Again, the further from the road it is, the more brave I am. And yeah, so all of this is about sunshine, photosynthesis, laying carbon on the ground, muck, and I spoke about that thatch. That's what our ground would look like maybe in October. So that's that midsummer trample lying down on the ground. And what you're creating is a kind of super warm, super mulch, super water retaining surface on the soil. And from the minute we did it, there's like fungi coming up everywhere. There's spiders everywhere. There's frogs everywhere. And a little bit like with some of the rewilding projects, you find that the nature on your farm starts acting completely differently. So we have grey herons, which we think of as a river bird, where we're at. And then one day when we got into this system, I went to the field and there's 6 grey herons, like the entire population of grey herons for our valley, are walking around like cowbirds around the cows. And then I watch, and they basically discovered that when the cows go through this, they're exposing all these frogs and toads, and they're eating them and throwing back their head, and they're sort of swallowing a frog. And you're like, I reckon herons used to be like a sort of cowbird in a proper system. They've just become something else because that's all we left them. So it's basic food pyramid stuff. It's spiders, it's voles, and what Rob the botanist, the ecologist, knew that I've taken me a long, long time to get my head around is, you remember the food pyramid that you sort of studied at school? The soil and the grazing, if you get it right, probably creates about 4 or 5 times as much biomass in the bottom layers of that food pyramid as anything else that can happen on the farm. Really nice to have the edge stuff and the rarer stuff, but if you can have 5 times as many frogs, 5 times as many voles, 5 times as many spiders, suddenly that's where the next layer of birds and things comes from. And we started noticing, instead of having like 5 meadow pipits on the farm or in a field when you walk through, now there's like 200 take off. And you're like, whoa, where did they come from? And we made it happen. So that's fungi, muck, amazing soil, and we're still talking about a pretty old-fashioned English farm with crappy fields that wind around hillsides, and but that's what we're basically trying to do, is to create a kind of savanna landscape. It turns out the mixture of woodland, thorny scrub, regen grazed pastures is pretty much like what most English flora and fauna evolved in, and the place starts humming, absolutely buzzing. And the biggest evangelist for this is actually now my wife Helen, who walks around the farm more than I do, actually, because we've got several dogs, and she'll take them for a walk every day. And every day she comes back absolutely purring about how much wildlife she's seen, how many birds. And now you couldn't pay my family to go back and farm conventionally. This is what we want to do. And those are the cattle we keep. We also do like school visits to the farm and farmer visits to the farm. Absolutely mad how many people want to come and see stuff when you're doing cool stuff. And do you know what else is really nice, right? So when we started restoring the pastures and the plant diversity on the farm, people started, this never happened in my previous farming life. People will stop me like tourists on the road. They don't know who I am. They don't know I'm James Rebanks and I write books and stand on stages. They just think I'm the farmer. And they'll say, I've been going past your farm all week. It's beautiful. It's full of flowers. Like, what have you done to this place? And whoa, I like this. Who doesn't like affirmation? Who doesn't like pride? Who doesn't like people respecting you? Like, we live in a world where they've paid us to go crappy, and then they want to kick us when we're down, right? Like, I don't want to be in that position. I want to look after land properly, and I want to be proud of looking after land properly. I want my kids to feel that pride and go, yeah, let's do it. We do sell a little bit of meat, but frankly, I find that a bit of a pain in the ass. So the focus. Yeah, we live in the middle of nowhere and it's not too handy. So basically people would come to the farm, they'd talk to you for an hour and a half and then buy $15 worth of meat. And think they were doing you a favor and ask if they could come back next week. And I'm like, you're trying to help me, you're good people, but the economics of this are absolutely terrible. And do you know what you learn? You learn that the infrastructure of modern life is not helping us. People have tiny little fridges in tiny little houses, and they're not as lucky as some of us that live in farmhouses. And they haven't got anywhere to put half a cow. They haven't got anywhere to put half a sheep. So we've got to be real about what other people are living with and what they've got to cope with. But I'm not a meat seller. And just very quickly before I take a few questions, the thing that drives us that I haven't even mentioned yet is that we love breeding pedigree livestock. That's what my granddad got out of bed for every morning. That's what my dad got out of bed for. That's what I get out of bed for. And increasingly, that's what my kids get out of bed for. And we're pretty damn good at it. We sell some of the best rams in that breed. Yeah, they've averaged over £1,000 per head, our rams this year. That's my 17-year-old daughter, B, absolutely rocking it. Refuses to take part in any projects that define her as a woman because she said, what the hell's it got to do with being a woman, Dad? I'm as good as anybody else. Like, stop making it about gender. I'm brilliant at what I do. So she's beating the boys there, and you can tell by the smile on her face. And really quickly, before we wrap it up, that... Mr. Skeptical about stripy cows, we went to the Breed Society sale with our first ever bull out of a regen grazing system from 1,200 feet above sea level 6 weeks ago. Went to the society sale, had 3 or 4 serious buyers come to us because they knew how we farm and they wanted hard grass-based genetics for real cattle that do a real job. They stepped up and bid against one another, and we matched the world record price for a belted Galloway bull of 20,000 guineas. So this is not hippie bullshit. This is right. This is about, can you be an absolutely awesome farmer that adds value to what you do, that takes your skills from the past, repurposes them in the best possible way, and creates a really exciting future that you want to get up in the morning, you want to rock it, and I want to rock it. And so, yeah, who's in charge of the farm right now? It's not Dad who talks too much on stages. It's 17-year-old B, who really deserves the respect. She's loving life right now because she's grown up in a family doing this slightly embarrassing regen stuff, and her friends don't quite get it. And then in the last 3 or 4 months, she stood at the main sales where the young people who are interested in sheep and cattle get their respect, and she's whooped their asses. And she's loved it because you can stand 6 inches tall. Anyone that's ever sold good cattle or sheep knows that. I'm going to stop. Okay, thank you.
So that was an amazing talk. I feel like the applause could go on for the entirety of our question time, but we do have very strict instructions to finish at 10:55, which is in 9 minutes. So I'll ask people to keep questions brief. James, if you could repeat the question so we get it on the video. And yeah, keep your questions brief. Over to you.
Good question. So one of the things, how many ewes do we run? How many cows do we run? So we're just building up to speed on the belted Galloways. We're going to run 50 cows on our farm and we run 400 ewes. And should I tell you something else, which is, who in this room has an operation where every cow and sheep on their farm is making really good money? Okay, good. Credit to you, sir. Most aren't. And one of the things I learned when we really started interrogating the livestock economics of our farm, because we've lost all our subsidies and stuff, boy, have we had to get real recently, yeah? Is that if your farm's pretty much marginal or only low-level profitable, the sad truth is a third, a half, maybe more of the livestock that you're carrying on your farm are actually losing money as individuals, right? Nobody wants to hear that. Everyone thinks it's about how many you have, with respect to the question. What we've tried to do is to say, not how many have we got, but which are the ones that are making money, and why are they making money, and would we be better to have 100 less overall, but 20 more of the ones that are making money, are those kind of trade-offs. And that's what we're doing. And actually, at the moment, I'm going to reduce the ewes by another 100 ewes, because we're finding that the bottom 100 are not particularly profitable. They're taking a lot of time, they're not particularly profitable, and the cow model is more profitable. And but like this gentleman here, I know that every single one of them cows is doing it and can do it. And my input costs are so low and my sales are so good, admittedly, partly because of one bull, but there's a lot of other good stuff being sold as well, that's where the focus is going to be. So I would, if you have to destock for a while, the truth is for most of you, that isn't going to hurt your accounts if you're really clever about which bit you destock to get the rest and recovery you need.
So there's a question, Stuart, and then the guy next to Stuart, and we'll go.
Thanks, James. Terrific to hear your story in the flesh. What does your dad say? And what does your granddad say? What do you reckon your great something or other?
Okay, so sadly, my dad. So what does my dad say? What does my granddad say? So my granddad died 30 years ago. I think he might have been the most confused by it. But to be fair, the old bugger loved nature. He loved his birds and he loved his wildlife, and he thought he was a good steward. I think he died not really knowing what we now know, which is he wasn't quite as good a steward as he thought he was. It's a bit more complicated. But he was a clever man. I think he'd have got his head around it, and I think he would have done many of the things that we've done. My dad's whole life was invested in modernising and doing a lot of the worst stuff, really, just because that's when he was living and working. He died 10 years ago. But even before he died, he could see the things that we were doing. And he really surprised me because we got like a river restoration charity came and they wanted to fence off all of our riparian areas, but they were playing hardball with us because they were saying, well, you can't do like a little strip. It has to be a wide strip and you have to give us more. And it was a time that Helen and I were taking over the farm business. We were broke. Didn't write books yet. There was nothing else to help. I went to see my dad and I said, are we prepared to give up some land to get this fencing done? And he just looked at me and he said, if they're going to re-fence the whole farm, son, suck it up. And that in a way was, and also when he was dying, my dad was a super pragmatist. So he said to me, I think he knew I was stubborn and very proud of what we'd always been. And one of the last things he said to me before he died was, don't fight everything. Don't be too stubborn. You don't have to do things the same way forever. He was sort of acknowledging he'd done stuff differently they didn't always like. And I think I would say to all of you, your job is not to be stubborn and do everything the same way forever. Like, don't put that pressure on yourself. If you have to bend, you have to change, you have to adapt. I think that's just what we have to do. And take the pressure off. Stop making it really sort of personal and angsty. Just learn to be flexible, I think, and take a deep breath and go, what would this look like? And actually, there's an Irish charity called Farming for Nature. I don't know if you've ever been on YouTube. They do these wonderful Farming for Nature ambassadors. There's one of those films I bloody love by a fellow called Thomas O'Connor. And he won it a few years ago. And he says this wonderful thing at the end of his film. He's got this wonderful permaculture farm doing cool things. And he said, I remember being a kid and being excited by the farm and excited by what it could be and finding every corner of it exciting and thinking about a future where I could do anything I liked on it. He said, we've got to get back to being those kids that are excited, not the grumpy old dads that are cynical and tired and a bit jaded. We've got to get back the excitement. And if I convey one thing to you today, it's that my family have got back their excitement. We're not beaten down, right? And you'll find this. I've been to a lot of the best regenerative farms in the world, best grazing farms in the world. You meet people that have got their mojo back. They're up for it. Like, it's exciting again. And it's difficult economically. Lots of things are challenging in this world, but this is a way to get your mojo back. That's how I would sell it.
Question here, and that's probably going to be the last question we can have. I'll just say, James is going to be signing books at the bookstore, which is, I think, up there somewhere. No, that down there. Immediately after this. That's all I need to say. Over to you, sir.
I think you said that you rotate your stock through paddock 3 days at a time.
Yep.
And then move them on so they've got maximum downtime. Does that stay a stable time frame throughout the year, or in the high growth period, in the low growth period, you're extending it out a little bit?
So that's yeah. So is the three-day thing on a pasture sort of set in stone with us, or are we changing it at different times of the year? Absolutely changing it at different times of the year. So if you can't work out how to get round your farm perfectly, let me tell you another hack, which is when plants go dormant outside of the growing season. I'm assuming you have a cold period. When you get to the dormant season, the plant can take more punishment. So this is really the stuff I'm talking about is for the growing season to treat plants really, really well. Winter you can sort of have longer periods on a field and cheat a bit. So yeah, in May and June, which is our really fast growing period, we would go around the farm very, very quickly, just take the tips off and try and keep moving as much as possible. After in that mid-July period when I'm trying to trample, my biggest challenge is getting around as much of the farm within about 10 days as I can to get as much carbon laid down to let it rest for the winter. And actually, though your simplest grazing plan is a lot of squares on a checkerboard and every field has the same recovery period, one of the cool things I've learned from my botanist friends is some of our worst land actually needs longer. Sometimes we skip it out of a rotational loop. The really bad land on the top might have twice as long. The worse the land is, the longer the recovery period it needs. The better the land, the less period it needs. And also, we live on this farm now with loads of rare plants, some of which don't like 120-day recovery periods. Some of them want shorter rotations. Some of them need a chance to flower and seed every 3rd or 4th year. So sometimes we're not doing the perfect model. Sometimes we're going through with a shorter rotation period. And that's another way of cheating as well, particularly if you've got a lot of lambs or bullocks that you're trying to grow. There's nuance to this that we could spend a lot of time doing. And I'm not here to sell anything. I am going to sign books. We do a grazing school on the farm every July. And if any of you happen to be in the UK, you want to come and learn from Caroline that's taught me, that's a cool way to do it. And I'm sure somebody here will do a sort of Southern Hemisphere grazing school where you can look at this. And what people do is they come and learn the technical stuff on our farm from her. And then we walk around fields and look at what it looks like at my place, good and bad.
Amazing. Please give James another applause.